Hi, everybody. Who's here for the Game Composer panel? Yeah. All right. Cool. Before we get started, Austin Winter is at a signing. He's going to be running a few minutes late, but who needs him? Because we've got Grant Kirkhope. Awesome.
Too right.
And we've got Alexander Brandon to my left as well. Awesome. So my name is Josh Welchel. I've been moderating this panel at MAGFest for a few years now. And it's changed form every year. So the first thing I like to do every single year is get a show of hands to see what you guys are interested in. Who's here because they're interested in doing something like what we do? Writing music. Okay, cool. Who doesn't care about that and just wants to hear jokes and funny things? Okay. Who here actually had a Nintendo 64? Holy shit. Okay. Who here knows the sound chip inside of the Nintendo 64? That's good. Nobody. We don't have to talk about that shit. Okay. Okay, cool. Who here has played Jazz Jackrabbit? Good. Who here has played Journey? Who here has played GoldenEye? Okay, cool. I should raise my hand too, I guess. Okay, that gives me a pretty good feel. Why don't we just go down and have you guys introduce yourselves, talk about what you're working on lately, and then when Austin gets here, we'll obviously have him talk about himself a little bit too.
Okay, I'm Grant Kirkhope. I'm, composer, etc. The game, I've got games in the past like Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye and Perfect Dark and all that stuff. I'm working on ukulele at the moment. Things I can't talk about as usual, as always. That's it, actually. That's my introduction.
Nice.
Hello, I'm Alexander Brandon, and let's see, I worked on soundtracks for Unreal Tournament, Deus Ex, Jazz Jackrabbit 2, more recently with the Hyperdot guys on Dust and Elysian Tale, and a score for a game that hasn't been announced yet, blah, 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 blah. I'm also doing sound design and music supervision and implementation of Mark Morgan's score for Torment Tides of Numenera. How many here have heard of that game? Ooh, cool. And so let's go at least a few. In addition to that, Job Simulator for the HTC Vive. Anybody heard of Job Simulator? Sweet. So it's a VR game. It's going to be coming out in April, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Jameson Sutton's helping me out with that, and he has some cool tracks in that game as well. That's it.
Again, my name's Josh. I'm just working on a soundtrack for a game coming to PS4 in the spring called Masquerada by the Witching Hour Studios, and that's pretty much it. So why don't we get started? Usually the way I like to start this is just talk about how we got into the industry. These are just the standard questions that we normally do. And then after I go through a short segment, about 10 minutes, I'm going to bring one of the mics down here, and I'm going to ask you guys that have questions to line up down this aisle. And basically, we're just going to rattle them off, okay? Everybody with me? Can everybody hear okay? That's really important. Yeah. All right. Is it mumbly at all? Do we need to talk slower?
Just me.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, cool. So why don't we just start with the basics? What was your first experience writing music for games? How'd you get into the industry? Sweet little anecdote, make us laugh. You know the bit.
All right, so I did normal sort of school stuff, and I played trumpet. I was classically trained and all that. And I played guitar from about 11. I was self-taught guitar player, so I played lots of metal bands. That's all I wanted to do, really, being Judas Priest. And then I went to music college and did a music degree as a classically trained trumpet player. I didn't want to do that, really. I was just good at it, so I did it. And then I came back out of college and just went back to playing in bands again. So I spent probably 11 years playing in, rock bands in my local area, not doing so well. Some did all right. We did some big tours, supporting some big bands like Bon Jovi and things like that, and Van Halen and all that stuff. But I never really got anywhere. And then that kind of came to an end, and I was back to playing in pubs and stuff, covers bands and stuff like that. And then I had a friend called Robin Beanland who was a keyboard player in one of the bands that I played for locally. And he announced he'd got a job. And I was like, what? No one that I knew got a job. Everyone that I knew was on unemployment benefit like me for years and, playing in crappy bands. So off he went to work at Rare. And about a year and a half went by. He said, Grant, you've been on unemployment benefit for about 11 years. Don't you think it's time you got a job? And I was like, well, I suppose so, but I can't really do anything. He said, why don't you try and do what I'm doing, writing music for games? Because he'd been at Rare a year and a half. He was doing Killer Instinct on the arcade machine. And so he recommended that I buy a copy of Cubase and an Atari ST with a meg of RAM and EMU Process Effects rack mount synth. And I spent about a year writing music that I thought was appropriate for video games, because I played a lot of games in those days. And sent 5 cassette tapes off to Rare over the course of that year. I never got a reply. And out the blue, I got a letter saying, please come for an interview. And I went, could you please write 3 tunes and bring them down with you? So I kind of went for the interview on the Friday. And David Wise and Simon Farmer, who was the manager, interviewed me. And I got the job. It's completely by fluke. Like, when I was at college, I failed the harmony exam 3 years out of 4. I had to pass it by the 4th year. I just scraped through. Like, I really was bad at harmony. I didn't understand it, and it was too complicated. I'm not really clever like that. But just, being a composer was the absolute furthest thing from my mind. I never once, not once, ever considered it, ever even thought about it. I wrote songs for the metal bands that I was in, but that was it. So to get to be a composer was like really not on my radar at all. So I got the job and started in '95 and started work on GoldenEye, and that was it. So.
He brings up a good point about being classically trained. Are you classically trained at all at any point?
Yeah, no, I did a music degree. Yeah, but as I say, I passed the degree. I did pass it, but it took me a long time. I couldn't pass the harmony exam. I failed it 3 years. But I don't know. I have that thing where I'm not convinced being trained in music at all is important. Like, I know tons of composers who aren't trained, who write great music. So I think, for me, the most important thing is to have a good ear. If you can hear something, you can probably write it. So I'm not a big believer in knowing about the right notes in the right place. All right,
cool. Thanks. Alex?
I love what you just said about, like, I'm not really clever like that. I mean, how many people here played Civilization Beyond Earth? Yeah, it's more than a few. I mean, just like there's, like, we listen to, well, maybe. We listen to each other's tracks, like, from, like, the old days, right? Whether it's N64 or old PC stuff. And, obviously it all doesn't necessarily age all that well. And so, like, you're never really sure of somebody's skill with something that could be really dynamic and rich and textured and acoustic and blah, blah, blah. So wow, this guy's good. This guy's really, it's not like GoldenEye wasn't an amazing soundtrack. I really enjoyed it. But then there's that next level, right, where we're just like working with live instrumentation or, just crazy sample libraries and, dynamics and all this other stuff that Jeremy Soule decided to start doing in the late 90s. And, well, not just him, but a few others. And so, I just listened to a couple of his tracks off there, and I was just like, yeah. So, yeah, no, you are clever like that. So how did I get started? It was by getting an AdLib sound card back in 1987, and my friend Jason Emery was programming a multi-parallax scrolling engine. Shadow of the Beast had shown that off in like nobody's business, and I was just wowed by it. Some amazing stuff coming out of Europe at the time that was just pushing the boundaries of what computers and consoles could do, and that really was the inspiration. So after I got the AdLib sound card, I wrote a couple of 100 tunes, and then the first game based on that engine that my friend was writing was called Tyrion by Epic Mega Games. It's a shooter some of you might have been familiar with. So yeah, and that was a lot of fun. Thunder Force 3 and a lot of other inspiration went into that. But before that, as far as being classically trained, I had piano lessons, and I did go to college and flunked out twice, taking some theory classes here and there, not doing too badly, but not really knowing what I wanted to do. So when I got my first check from Epic, then my parents actually breathed a sigh of relief that their son wasn't going to be living at home for the rest of his life.
Awesome. So there's another good point about classical education. I don't think as well that it's really important. I think that's the kind of driving point. Through the years that we've done this, most composers will tell you it's helpful to have some sort of training, but if you haven't done it or you're not interested in it and you're doing it, the only key to being successful is really doing it. And I think that everyone can kind of get behind that. That's kind of like the MAGFest vibe, right? Just run into a jam space and just jam. Have you guys been in any jam rooms yet?
I've looked in, I haven't played, but I've looked in, yeah, I looked in jam space. Yeah.
Okay. Alex?
I was in the jam clinic for 2 hours teaching audio kinetics wise, but not playing. Yes, I'd love to get playing.
That's awesome. Cool. So when you guys were in your early career, so we did computer music and you were doing the N64 thing, and it's very different, as you mentioned, from live instrumentation. Between when you guys got started years ago and where we are now, what do you think the biggest change has been, and maybe what are the challenges and how are they different from what we were doing 10 years ago?
You can go
Wow. Good one, Josh. No, seriously. I think that, and I can't say this enough. The having limitations is actually a very good thing. But back in the days when you have limited sample space and you have, I've only got a meg and a half or a meg, like say in Unreal or Jazz Jackrabbit 2 or whatever, just trying to take that limitation and make something good with it really focuses your mind on things like composition and uniqueness of just how the piece that you're writing will develop, and dynamics and uniqueness. So when you have unlimited resources, like all you have to do is essentially get Omnisphere, and your mind starts melting out of your ears with the options that you have. And when you start looking at, am I going to get Cinesamples, or am I going to get Spitfire, or am I going to get Berlin Strings, and your mind starts melting out of your ears because there's all kinds of consideration that you have. Austin Wintory, ladies and gentlemen. The man's a marvel. I'm going to finish up with that real quick. So
I'm
yeah.
here for the water. I'm gonna.
Oh, okay. He's going to head back. All right, cool.
I brought beer.
So yeah, the enormity of exactly of the power that people have and the choices that you have mean you have to focus and concentrate specifically on and now that he's here, I'm going to just put him on the spot and say Journey is a perfect example of that. It is the distillation of tone and how that integrates with what you're trying to do emotionally and gameplay-wise and mechanics-wise, and as well as supporting the visuals all at once in the simplest possible way. And how many people here went to see Journey live today? For the people that don't. We've got snipers for the people that don't in the back. But no, really, in all seriousness, that's a perfect example of the equivalent of only having 11 voices on an ad lib. You're essentially taking this potential of infinite options and saying, no, let's take one thing and make it really rich, deep, and an emotionally fulfilling experience. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge today, is taking something, whether you want to focus on uniqueness and twiddle knobs with a synth, or whether you want to take a live set of orchestral people and do what this guy did, or do what Jason Graves did, by saying let's use the back of our bows in order to make the sounds that we have for Dead Space. That is the biggest sort of the difference that we have, is trying to hone what it is your focus is going to be.
So to catch Austin, but basically we're asking, what is the biggest change from when you got started to today, and what kind of challenges are you facing? I think Alex did a good job answering, but Grant, I don't want to skip you. I think you're just ready to answer.
Austin bloody Wintry.
No way. Everyone's here for Grant. We all know it.
Here, use this guy.
Good. No one heard what I just said. So I mean, you specifically said Grant. So let's hear it from Mr. Kirkhope.
I've forgotten what the question is now. I guess I write music the same way I've always written it from the start. I haven't changed that at all. So I'm not very sort of intellectual when it comes to that stuff. I just kind of mess around until it sounds good. I think technology's changed a lot, and Alexander says, tons of libraries have got bigger and all that kind of stuff. And I think that in the N64 day, it wasn't expected to sound great, right? You just did your best. But nowadays, when you're making these huge MIDI mock-ups of orchestra, people want it to sound like real orchestra, and that's really hard. And composers, are by nature people that write music that we're not mixers, we're not masters, or certainly I'm not. And to get that MIDI mock-up to sound great is a pain in the ass and takes a long time. And I'm still not getting to do a good job of that. I don't think I'm great at that either. So that to me is a bit annoying. But then when you get have to do electronic stuff, I think, oh great, I can quantize it all. I don't have to make it sound human. But then you've got 6,000 bass sounds to go through until you find the one. That takes the time the other way. So that's equally annoying for me. I'm not one of the guys that selects an Omnisphere sound and then fiddles with it. I'll just take that sound and use it right. I keep getting told off by Mr. Baranowski that that it's really bad to take synth patches and use them as they are. You should always mess with that and make them your own. I don't do that at all. I haven't got the time to do it. I haven't got the interest to do it either. So I will just search through Omnisphere. I've got Omnisphere 2 now, so there's even more to search through. So I will look for sounds that I like, and I might fiddle with it a bit, but not much. I do fiddle with massive sometimes, but it's a bit complicated, and I'm not that bright. that's the difference, I think. I think that, you know, the job now, certainly as a video game composer, is you have to do all of it. You have to write it, you know, mix it, master it, everything, produce it, the whole thing. And like, in days gone by, you know, other people would mix it and other people would master it. And I guess at the top end of the market, people still do that. But at my level, I do it all. So sometimes it's all right, and sometimes it's just shit. I try my best. So I think the technology is great, but it's equally, it just takes more work. Like when I had like a finite little MIDI orchestra sat in my Banjo-Kazooie cartridge, I only had those amount of sounds, right? And I had to use those sounds, and that was it. And in some respects, having a live orchestra, you've got a finite amount of instruments. You know, there's only so many, you know, there's only woodwind, percussion, you know, strings, brass, you know, but you've got to make it sound human and all that stuff you have to do to massage it all. So it's a big, long, laborious process. I might just be particularly bad at it, but that's the difference. That level of polishing you have to do just gets more and more and more and more. And some people are really good at that. Write fantastic MIDI mock-ups that just sound amazing. And I'm not great at that. So I think that's my main difference. I think it's got harder. Like I like to write music. I like to write music and like melody and chords. That's my favorite part. And the rest of it's a bit I don't like as much. So that's just me.
Austin, do you want to talk really quickly? I'm about to go down and we're going to do questions. So if you guys want to start lining up at the aisle, I'm going to walk down with the mic. But Austin, a question for you. Just kind of swing off Grant's point about how laborious the process can be. Can you talk a bit about how you go from your ideation phase where you're drafting maybe your MIDI mock-up to when you're writing parts for the instrumentation?
It's probably not fundamentally different from anything that these guys do. I definitely do mock-ups. I also don't really love that process. I like, you know, electronic music making, which is not really a mock-up, obviously. But if you're talking about orchestral samples or anything like that, that is always an early part of the process. But I like to, you know, I tend to start with like a pencil and paper and then come up with some basic thing, and then immediately, you know, that's a day, and then the next 6 months are mock-ups and things like that. So I will sometimes hire musicians for like a test recording, just to come, even if it's just like one violin to come in and just read something down and layer it, because I like to send that to be the first thing the developer hears, so that I'm not like, okay, later it's going to be blah, 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 blah. I'm like, it's pretty much going to be like this. I'll just kind of record with like a better mic next time. But that way, if they don't like it, they're reacting to something that's actually pretty close to what I was imagining. This obviously only applies to music that requires live recording, which not all of it does, but any sort of thing. And I also don't obviously just go record like a full orchestra every time, because that's crazy, you know, costly. It takes a lot of time. That would be ridiculous. But I will do the small recordings like that, and that can be, because then you discover things. A musician plays a thing, and you're like, oh wow, that suddenly triggered a whole other set of ideas, and so, you know.
Absolutely. I have a woodwind player who has me transpose for glissandos all the time. It just changes it. Once I hear it, I'm like, oh shit, I got to do everything different. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's get started with questions. Ideally, your questions can be focused at all three or at one person. I would like to have time to get through everybody, so if you have a question, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and get in line so I can judge how long this is going to take. So if you're holding on to it and you're thinking, I'm going to sit down for a while, maybe don't do that.
We like questions. Yeah.
How you guys doing?
Hello.
Great.
Fantastic.
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking.
Good to hear.
So, Grant, back when you were on Game Grumps, you were telling a story about the origin of Ikum Ukum in Banjo-Kazooie, and how it's just kind of mixed samples of you saying almanackers. I was wondering...
It's not almanackers. It's a phrase that it was... it's come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
That was right.
That's a British phrase for the football fans when they're going to fight somebody.
That's right. Thank you. I was wondering if you guys had any other weird stories like that, of just like weird samples that just ended up working out or whatever.
I've done my few, I suppose, but I mean, I like the Clanker's Cavern, the whale was just Banjo's voice samples slowed down to really low pitch. So that's the whale is just his samples. Because obviously, with the N64, it's such a tiny amount of memory that it was good you could reuse stuff. You reuse it over and over again. So if you just pitch it miles down, you can't tell what it is. So that was Banjo's voice just doing that. I guess there's tons of other stuff that used to repurpose. You just play one pitch for one and one pitch for another. A bit like that. I'm sure I've got a few stories there. Mr. Brandon, you must have a few stories there?
No, yes, I do actually. It's actually very similar to what you're talking about. Like if you take and as a matter of fact, it was Kurt Larson who's used to be the lead singer of actually still is lead singer of Information Society. While he was working at Crystal Dynamics, doing stuff on the Tomb Raider series at that point, he was talking to a group of people on an email list about just like, hey, I dropped the cap to a can of paint on my desk and recorded it and sampled it and used it as an instrument. And then on the flip side, there's these guys that I hear that are working for Peter Gabriel saying, hey, guys, why don't we just record like just a whole bunch of stuff and we'll take like 200 tracks and we'll compress them all down to a stereo and we'll use that as a sample. So like in my case, I guess like it's really like I will exhaust a bunch of presets. And I will tweak those presets until I hear what I'm hearing in my head necessarily. And yes, it is very time consuming. But at the same time, I kind of like Austin. I'm not that preference to getting, even though and like Grant said, it's annoying to go from something that's a mock-up to something that's full scale. So as far as that goes, it's like if I hear something in my head like that, I just can't get anyplace else, yes, I will call somebody that's a live instrumentalist of any kind, or I will run into the booth and I will actually make that sound vocally, at least so that I have what I really wanted to hear. And sometimes tweaking knobs just doesn't cut it.
I think for me, there was a bunch of kind of very subtle but weird percussion in the very beginning of Journey, in the very opening scene. And that was, at the time, I was sharing a studio with a film composer named John Debney. And he was working on Iron Man 2. And he was doing percussion tracking in his room upstairs. And they were storing all the instruments as they were finishing using them in the hallway outside of my room. So I just kept stealing things from the box and recording them for Journey. I don't know if John actually knows that. So like there's some weird whirly things that look like long springs that when you do this, they do this kind of and there's a lot of that in the very opening of Journey. You can pretty hear it clearly. And that was, something I jacked from Iron Man 2, presumably. But I am a big fan of this. I did a movie once where the primary instrument was the sound of a baby crying that I had sampled from a friend who had just had a baby and did weird things with it. And so I love that sort of thing. I'm a fan of the weird.
Did weird things with the sample or did weird things with the baby?
Well, yeah, I have a restraining order, so
Good.
My lawyer advises I don't answer that question.
That's good advice.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to MAGFest. I was kind of curious. I imagine you've got samples that you kind of favor above other samples just because maybe you like the sound of them. I was kind of wondering if you ever have to catch yourself using that sample too much, or if that's not really an issue because the themes change so much between games.
So we're wondering if you guys
Yes,
suffer from...
I get the gist of that. So like sometimes I kind of think I work in reverse to that. So a lot of times you hear, staccato strings or that on things because usually the staccato samples sound good, and getting the legato sounds to sound good is hard. So I tend to avoid things that I think sound shitty. So even though I've got decent sample libraries, I still moan about the string legato. It never sounds great to me. But the staccato always sounds good. That's why you get Hans Zimmer going digga 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 all the time with a bunch of drums, because you load up damage. You get on the big organic thing, and then you bang away in the drums for a while. The strings go digga digga digga, and you're finished, right? So, which kind of annoys me a little bit. Hope you're not videoing this, anybody. So that's my career over. So I think I do tend to avoid things that don't sound great. And as a trumpet player, I sometimes miss out on the trumpets because I don't think the samples sound great, but only because I'm a trumpet player, so I guess I don't like it as much, but they probably sound all right to everybody else. So I think the sample libraries, some of them are great, but I've yet to find a really great legato string that I can really believe in, that sounds really cool and it sounds just like a real person. I think some things you can get away with it, but that you can't, I don't think. So an awful lot of digga, digga, digga goes on.
I won't necessarily say sample, but I will say certain techniques. Ever since Lisa Gerard really sort of started getting onto the film scene as opposed to the beautiful vocalist for Dead Can Dance, it's very tempting to go to the 8DO, I guess it is, libraries and find some woman's voice and just push a button in here. And
no one knows that he actually recorded the 8DO library.
it's become. I mean, it's not that in and of itself it's beautiful and it's its own archetype, but at the same time, if it becomes ubiquitous enough, it's sort of like the mouse click that you hear in commercials or the sound that you hear with every flame sound effect. That, it just gets kind of grating, and so then at that point, that goes into the uniqueness factor I was talking about earlier. It's just like, okay, vocals are great. Let's not discount a vocalist at all. Let's just try something else.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I'm going on a tangent from the actual question, but of the kind of wordless female vocal cliche, you must probably all have seen the movie Tropic Thunder. So like, Lisbeth Scott is one of the main sort of people that you call to do that vocal. And the opening scene of that movie is like the movie within the movie. And Teddy Shapiro, the composer, hired her to do that, to like make fun. It's like he was writing a meta score within Tropic Thunder, and he had her go all out, essentially making fun of herself and Lisa Gerrard and all of that, in good taste. But I felt like after that, now it's truly forbidden, because now you're imitating parody, and if you're doing it not also as parody, which of course Avatar did very shortly after that, and I thought, with all due respect to James Horner, and of course it was Lisbeth also on Avatar, it's like, yeah, let it go. Just let it go. Let the duduk go. In the 80s, let the shakuhachi go. Yeah. Like, these things need to breathe for a little while, and then we can circle back to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice. That was a wonderful question. Thank you.
So I'm really interested in how you guys develop melodies for a purpose, because I've always heard that melodies, especially in interactive media, is very important and can solidify an entire experience. So.
No, it's me.
All
right. I guess, like I like to write melodies right a lot. Right? I've always seemed to have done that. That's kind of, I don't know if I'm known for it, but I certainly like to do it.
I would say yes.
Well, have a go. I think it's mega important. I've got that kind of leitmotif thing. I find that really, really important. Like, when Darth Vader walks in, it's duh, 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 duh. It's fantastic, right? And I think for me, it's still, that kind of thing still exists in video games these days, but I think in movies not so much. And I wish movies were a bit less generic and a bit more like video games in some respects, so we can still do that stuff. I haven't done any movies, so I don't know. Austin has, of course. So that kind of pisses me off that doesn't happen a bit more. And I guess it just seems to be less of an art than it used to be. And I think, writing it just is like, it's all about using imagination, right? And it's about closing your eyes, imagining that character or that place and imagining what it's like. If it's a creepy forest or something, you're going to write something that's creepy. If it's icy castle, it's going to be Celeste, and I don't know, pizzicato strings and glockenspiel, all that kind of imagination you have in your head. So that's where I think where it all comes from. And I think you just have to try and tell the story of what's going on in music somehow. That's the thing. I think the image tells you what the story is, but the music tells you how you should feel. That's the part that gives you the feel. So that's the way I look at it. I think melody writing it's getting less prevalent in movies. I think it's getting more prevalent in games. That's what I think.
I think Undertale is a great example of that.
Yeah, that's a great score.
Alex?
I think that I'm going to sort of agree, but also not agree. For a while, I was saying exactly the same thing. Like, where the heck are the themes in everything? They're all gone. They've died. No one can remember a score from anything because they're like, well, I can't really remember it, but I remember liking it. It's a tricky ground, really. I like Grant. I do gravitate towards just writing a theme. It really helps create a melodic, harmonic center for your piece, and for that, everything can grow from it. But at the same time, I was listening to 12 Years a Slave. Anybody seen that film? I remember watching the movie and going, "This is a pretty cool score. I kind of dig this. It's very atmospheric. It's non-melodic per se. It's more of atmospheric and textural and harmonic. But at the end, I was like, Wonder does it. And it says Hans Zimmer, and I was like, I guess, you know, the bois, you couldn't handle the bois, right? You know, like the bois came back and bit him in the
It's
ass.
the
and he was
staccato
like-
string slowed down
or the
800 times.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very slow dugga.
Yeah, it's just slowed
That's
down.
what it was. He's like,
Slow dugga.
256 tracks, use them as samples.
We're gonna work Hans into every single answer.
Exactly. Yes. No. I think we're at a point where like it's in some cases you can, you know, like create a melody without creating a melody, if that makes any sense. Literally, it's not like just a single line of a single melodic line of notes that you then are able to use counterpoint with, or however, whatever theoretical technique that you want to use. It could be literally just like, you know, handshaking over a chord, holding it down, going through separate patches and going, okay, that's great, and let me shift that into this, and let me shift that into something else, and let's see what happens, right? Let's like make it a sound design experience per se. I think there's validity in that, but at the same time, yes, you are going to find situations where, depending on what it is that you're writing for, especially like if it's for a game or if it's just a piece of music by itself, that it'll demand something else, and that very well could be a traditional theme.
I don't really have much to add to that. I'm a big fan of melody. I'm also a big fan of melody having value because you're coming from a passage without melody. So, you know, I mean, like for those that were in the Journey performance a bit ago, people talk to me about Journey as a very melodic score, but when you see it all played down like that, you probably realize there's huge sections of it that are not melodic. And that's obviously on purpose for the same reason that like you kind of exist in a certain place so that when the melody emerges, it has a certain sense of arrival as a result. If it's just constant melody, then melody ceases to have value. In the same way that if the game never stops playing music, music itself starts to have no value. I'm a big fan of silence in games, which there's also very little of.
I think that there's, to really put a point to that question, studying positive and negative space, something you learn a lot from dance or from something like sculpture art. Apply that to melody, apply that to rhythm, apply that to texture. Make it, everything matters, positive and negative. If you oversaturate, you're going to lose it. This is going to not be as special.
Totally agree. In fact, I would say you can learn so much about music by studying all arts but music.
Absolutely.
Like learn what works about sculpture, about painting, about filmmaking, about game design, about novel writing, and figure out, like go watch the YouTube channel Every Frame a Painting that breaks down filmmaking, you know, in very specific, but you will learn so much about music by internalizing the lessons from that.
Absolutely. Cool, thanks for the question.
I love that by the time it gets to me, it's like mutated that I don't think I'm ever actually answering what was specifically asked. Like I definitely didn't say if I reused too many samples, but that's all right.
What colleges did you guys go to, and did you have any mentors to like guide you along your path to figure out how to get into the industry or whatever, you know?
All right, I went to the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester in the UK. I did a 4-year classical degree, like in music, you know, playing trumpet as my major. I did the performance course and I did the graduate course too, which was like the writing course along with it. And I passed, fully enough. But I've got to say, nothing about that experience really stayed with me at all. I say I was particularly bad at harmony, and I failed the exam 3 years out of 4 and only scraped by at the end of it. None of the teachers that I came across really inspired me at all. So I was really into metal really heavily then. I just wanted to be a metal band. I didn't want to be there at all. But the one thing I did take away from college, the one thing I did religiously was that every Tuesday and Thursday the college orchestra rehearsed, and I never missed that in 4 years. I was there every Tuesday, so I got to hear a lot of stuff. And that was the most important takeaway I got from music college, was that I listened to orchestral music every Tuesday and Thursday without fail, and discovered tons of pieces I never heard of and really liked. And that I found that more important to me than anything else. I always think using your ears is like the most important thing. I think if you can hear it, you can, and I said before, if you can hear it, you can write it. And that was my biggest takeaway. I loved listening to the orchestra every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 years. So, yeah.
To expand on that, the thing you want to study is called dictation, if you want that gift. It's not really a gift, it is something you can learn. And it's the most valuable thing. If you're going from non-musicianship to musicianship, that will help you succeed here.
I think I mentioned it earlier. I went to the College of Worcester and went for 2 years, but flunked out both times. I took a couple of theory courses. There was one particular teacher that I said, "Oh, you're a great pianist," because it seemed as though he would sit down and sight read whatever, and he did it really well. And he was quick to correct me by saying, "I'm a vocal pedagogy teacher," and so. He was our theory teacher as well, and so he would say, like we would get the answers wrong to all the questions that he would pose, like after reading the first bits of the tonal harmony, which is usually the textbook that they give you for theory classes, and we would say, oh, we do this interval to this interval, and if we kept getting it wrong, he would go. He would go to the blackboard and draw a gravestone, and so he would draw parallel fifths on one gravestone, and the next he would put a tritone. And so that's kind of my takeaway from that. I didn't really so much have mentors in college. The most inspirational mentor I've had throughout my early years in the game industry had nothing to do with actual musical composition, and it was George the Fat Man Sanger. His inspiration was all about how to relate to people and how to approach just being inspired, but just networking in community and being cool to one another.
So hang on,
so
your harmony teacher said that the tritone and the parallel fifth was the worst thing you could do?
It was just the wrong answer to the questions he was asking.
That's my entire harmony.
Yeah.
Tritone.
There you go.
No tritones, no grants.
That's awesome.
It's true.
Shit.
I studied. I did 2 years at NYU, and then I transferred to USC, and in LA, and did a composition degree also, and in a very classical setting, but knowing very much that I was very keen on film and on video games and things, and I got my start at USC. I mean, Flow, the game that was the first game of Genova Chen, who made Journey. He was a student there also, so we met in school there. So that I could have not attended a single class and still met him and gotten my money's worth at USC basically, and met someone really important in my life. But I will say for me that kind of echoing Grant's comment about the orchestra, by the time I got to college, I had spent a huge amount of time in front of orchestras because in high school I kind of commandeered the high school orchestra and would give them handwritten music, and they just let me get up there and do this, and they played it back, and after like 4 years of that, it started to sound remotely like bad music as opposed to whatever is below that, and that was massively educational. I'm a big nerd for all the theory and stuff like that. I do really like that, but the hands-on and even the fact that it was like handwritten music, which is dumb because it's not like notation software didn't exist. I was just stupid. But yeah, so for me that was, I'm a fan of these more classical degrees, but I also think if you just find musicians and just put stuff in front of it, it doesn't have to be an orchestra either. It could be just a single person who plays anything. And just say, hey, will you play this? And you'll learn more of that than a year of any school.
Yep. No.
What?
I
didn't
he's
hear what
talking
you
about
said.
impulse tracker.
That's a question for
That's a question for later. To kind of hit your point about the mentorship, things have changed a lot though over the years. The market's now super saturated. On Twitter, you'll find tons of people writing game music, getting involved with indie devs. I think just go to some jams, game jams specifically, and make yourself your mentor. Let your future self be your mentor, and really see where do I want to be. Listen to that person, and just follow your own feet.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I never really hear composers really talk much about the actual programs they use
Or hardware.
Yeah, I never hear composers really talk about the programs they use or like the process. I know you're talking about digital audio workstations, and you briefly mentioned Cubase, and Finale, as far as I know, is like the standard for notation. But what about the other steps besides that? Because if even before you put in Finale, maybe you use a digital audio workstation, or are there like certain sample libraries you might prefer to others? Could you talk a bit more about the actual programs and the process, or like if you use different ones?
Yeah, so I just use Pro Tools. I used to use Cubase a lot when I was at Rare, and then towards the end of my time at Rare, it got switched to Pro Tools, and I was kind of reluctant to do it because I'm really slow to learn stuff. So I sort of moved reluctantly to Pro Tools, and the MIDI got better. I think Pro Tools 9, so it's more, or 8, it's more like Cubase. So I got stuck with Pro Tools really, and I use it still now. And I find it a bit annoying that I have to use it because it's expensive and everything else is a bit cheaper. And it's a pain in the ass because they make you pay tons of money for extra bits and pieces, which is just ridiculous. I've actually just moved to Pro Tools 12-track subscription model. I thought I'd try it for a year, so I paid me $200. Let's see what happens. I'm annoyed about it, but I'm stuck with it really. But I like everything sits inside it, right? So I used to use Pro Tools when it was 32-bit. I had to use the Vienna Ensemble stuff, to get to the extra RAM. That's a pain in the ass. So I like it now. It's all on the side of the same engine, So I'm just like anybody else. I use Hollywood strings, brass and woodwind for my stuff. I use True Strike percussion, Omnisphere 2, Damage. What else? Other bits and pieces, but nothing spectacular by any means. And I've got a few different. I use like Fab Filter for EQ and things like that. And but I'm by no means a technophobe. I'm a technophobe. I'm by no means a techno advocate. So I'm not great at that. So I kind of muddle my way through, kind of thing. Some people are really good at that stuff. I'm just not great at myself. But that's basically what I use. Nothing spectacular. I can't do anything else. That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's my lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so I use Nuendo. I've been using it since, 2004, right about when it came out. And it's great, and I didn't realize it as much at the time, but yeah, it's mainly because as I wear different hats from composer to sound designer to voice actor, if I'm doing post for a game or if I need to do surround mixing, then Nuendo really comes in handy if I need to do more than 5.1. So that's the main thing there. But yeah, as far as like libraries go, it's mostly the stuff that that Grant said. I've used, oddly enough, I use East-West Quantum Leap still, even though a lot of people say that it's dated and old and not so great. I still find it pretty good, oddly enough. It's just how you use your tool, right? And what techniques that you're actually employing. Now, having said that, it does fall short in some areas, and to that end, I've augmented it with things like Embertone and Spitfire, which I think the two of them together can sound really amazing. There's people that really get hung up on, oh, well, this reverb doesn't match with that reverb, or this doesn't do that, and whatever. So yeah, and as far as effects go, I use Fab Filter stuff. It's really, really good, and I use the stuff that comes with Nuendo or Cubase or whatever as well. So
I use Digital Performer, and you mentioned Finale. Finale and Sibelius pretty much divide down the middle, and they're effectively the same. It's just whatever you're most comfortable with. I use Finale. And I've always used Digital Performer versus Cubase or Logic, and audio mixing in Pro Tools, but I sometimes will actually audio mix in DP also, depending on the scope. I wouldn't record an orchestra into Digital Performer, but I would track soloists into it, and if that's all that project is going to have, then the project will live and die there. And yeah, samples. I'm a fan of a lot of these same libraries. The thing to remember is the reason why we're giving you kind of like a wishy-washy answer is because the discovery that you make is that the libraries won't write the music for you, and they don't make like a good piece great or an average piece good or anything like that. They really, because yeah, I have some libraries that I use that are like that I have to have like special, there's this program called G Player, which lets you sort of import old Giga Studio samples because Giga Studio is totally defunct. But there are some awesome Giga Studio libraries that are like 20 years old. Yeah, there is. And so it's like, and what's funny is that some of them are so distinctive, but they've been out of circulation for so long that you're like the guy with the cool hip thing now. And so yeah, it's one of those. It doesn't actually matter. It's one of those that, like, if you haven't started that process yet, then, inch into it because it can seem very overwhelming. You see photos of, like, Jack Wall posing in front of his rig, and it looks very intimidating because it's very elaborate, right? And I was that guy, too, where I thought, I don't even know where to start. I know what a keyboard and mouse is. And so start there, I mean, I have friends who write, like, do you know C418, the guy that did mine? He can do, like, everything on a laptop, and it's awesome. So, you just only go invest in new software, new tools when you hit some wall where you have an idea and then you discover, oh, this thing helps me achieve that idea. As opposed to if I go buy all this stuff, now I'm equipped to be a composer because in theory, that's all up here anyway.
Just to wrap this up, you're at a convention called MAGFest and surrounded by musicians. These are all people who love to perform and play. Just
There's
ask
some
the people.
spectacular ones in this room. I'm eyeballing from here. So.
Absolutely. So when you are meeting new people, musicians especially, and listening, just talk to them, let them know what you're doing, and make friends, and that's how it all starts.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time and wisdom, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. My question is for Austin. I'm not ever going to forget what I experienced today with Journey Live.
Thanks.
And as someone who composes and orchestrates and conducts a little bit, I thought I could anticipate what I was going to experience and what I
thought I'd be able to anticipate it also. We were both wrong.
So I kept having this sort of split experience of like, oh my gosh, this is so divine, and the other side was just so frustrated, like, how is this even remotely possible? And I'm wondering, like, there were moments where I thought, like, okay, I think they're holding on some sort of vamp, and then I think I'm seeing a cue at a particular trigger point, but I perfectly respect if you don't want to answer, but if you're willing to pull the curtain back at all, how much of what we experienced was serendipitous, and to what lengths did you really have to go to prepare some of that synchronicity, I guess?
Sure. Well, so one of the awesome secrets of game scoring is there's always going to be some happy accident that because we know we're dealing with an interactive media, we are in this mindset where we're looking for agency in everything. It kind of reorients your thinking versus if you sit down to watch a film, it's more passive, right? So when things happen, there's a certain sense of like, what made that happen, you know? Because this was all built to do something. And so the secret of that, though, is that if the music is plugging along and there's something that catches your attention in the game, whatever's going on in the music, you're predisposed to think, oh, wow, that musical moment was so perfectly, I can't believe it synced so like that. It's not an uncommon phenomenon. Even in film, you just take any piece of music and throw it against footage, there will be happy accidents in there that are amazing. That said, I am a fan of really diligently trying to make something that follows the player experience extremely adaptively, and Journey is kind of like one of the most extreme I've ever been able to go with that, because the game is so short and focused, but yet it's a decent amount of music that I was able to get really granular. So, depending on very specifically what you were looking at or reacting to, most of that stuff is actually intentional. And insanely hard to do live, it turns out. And because we're just trying to recreate the way the game worked, the actual game score functions. And huge credit to Patrick, the arranger who helped, he's in here somewhere. He's over there, next to the amazing Journey cosplayer. Patrick, I gave him all of my DP files for Journey and all the conductor scores from things that I've extracted from that for a concert, and basically said, like, here, you can see how I put it all together, but now we have to translate it into this new instrumentation and also figure out how to make this performable. And he, kind of was instrumental in that. But yeah, and it was a lot. I mean, I was doing hand signals and things to the musicians every few bars, basically, for the whole thing. It's incredibly, I never thought that just getting up and conducting would seem easy until I tried that. And then I realized, like, oh, if I just start on bar one and go till it's over, that's nothing now. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Just for sake of time, we've got about 10 minutes left, so we need to kind of do some faster
Lightning
answers
round.
and just lightning round, exactly.
Yes or
So, with no further ado, let's just do this.
Okay, so I've found that in recent years, not so recent, last 10 years, there's been a trend away from bold and memorable music in video games. Instead, it's more like orchestral background noise.
We're sorry.
Sometimes you have music that changes whenever the player's doing something, like, for example, combat-specific music. Sometimes that can actually ruin the experience because it lets you know that you're in combat when you aren't really aware of it. And it generates a lot of music that isn't really memorable. I remember back in the late 90s when you had a lot of depth in the music, a lot of instruments going on at the same time. Now, there recently has been a movement towards like the old chiptune style, but a lot of that is more intended to sound like classic consoles, Nintendo style, for example, and it really just isn't the same. So, what?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's basically our entire careers, just washed away. So that's it.
it's all Austin's fault.
I know. Sorry.
Opinions and views on the topic. Like, why?
D-
why not?
There's a, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping in.
you can.
There's a, yeah, there's an entire article on this, and it talks exactly about what you're talking about. That like, oh, it used to be memorable, now it's not memorable. There's some memorable things, like for example, the Halo theme. You can't really get that out of your head once you've heard it. And yes, it's just the title theme. The rest of the game, you're like, oh, I can't really necessarily think of the themes there. As far as games that use 8-bit stuff that kind of takes it beyond the traditional NES, I would point to Shovel Knight as a really good example of something that just sort of like breaks some of those rules and ends up sounding really totally kick-ass, and yet it's got that sort of 8-bit feel. I think the phenomenon that you're observing is because there are so many games. If you look at a chart of like all the games that have been released over the years, like it just shotguns and expands and gets to the point where when you have so many people contributing so much, that like when you've got this AAA stuff, yes, there happens to be like an expectation, okay, it needs to sound like the next Avengers film. I think we all kind of agree that a lot of producers and even audio directors seem to have like a feeling that like, okay, well, we need to sound big, and to sound big, this is the template that we need to use. I think all of us are in agreement that that's there to some degree, not all the time, but like it's there enough that like that's why I think everybody at this table is kind of like, well, I don't necessarily want to really hear the exact same thing. Like Beyond Earth is like, it is an orchestral score, but I can't describe exactly why it's different. It's like there's something about it that it's different. It's like it's not your average like, and same with like Mass Effect and other things like that. But at the same time, they're not nearly as thematic as a John Williams score, and they're not as thematic as like your average Mega Man score. So things are changing rapidly. There's like a huge amount of like variety out there, so it's harder to find things that speak to the same things that spoke to you earlier. So I will sympathize completely there, but I will also say that like you just kind of got to look a little harder.
Yeah, I have to just add a sentence that says exactly that. Like there's this whole concept of like this cognitive bias of you remember the hits and you forget the misses, and so if like 30 games came out in a given year in 1995 and 15 had amazing scores, and then in 2016 15 amazing scores came out but 500 games came out, the perception is, oh, game music has gone to hell, but in reality the exact same number of hits are happening. They're just harder to find. Because I between these two and several other colleagues, I am consistently blown away by what I hear in the business, in games. There are people, to be able to even call people colleagues whose music I admire so much isn't totally overwhelming to me. Because, yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of great stuff still going on, but it is not necessarily right in front of you the way it used to be.
Cool. I want to try to do a lightning round that's a little more lightning.
You mentioned using a lot of pizzicato strings and staccato strings, and when you do things like that, assuming that you aren't composing your piece to be played by a live orchestra or anyone in general, are you concerned about realism, as in, using notes that are outside the range of the actual instrument, or making things that would be really boring to play? Does that bug you?
If it's never going to be recorded, then
Yeah.
make it sound as good as it could sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go with that.
Because who are you beholden to at that point? It's like, is some violinist gonna track you down and take you into a back alley and be like, yeah,
This is boring.
do whatever you got to do. You
Yeah,
can play things that are you can write things that are impossibly fast, for example. But if it's never gonna have to sit in front of somebody, then do that.
Okay.
That's the answer.
Thank you.
Hey guys, awesome. Long time no see.
Yeah, exactly. Hi again.
Yeah, so pretty simple question, but I never really hear any composers really talking about this because there's a gray area. I'm a freelance composer myself, so it's still a gray area to me, and I don't really know when you get out of it. My question is, what was the first project that you ever worked on that you realized maybe you made it big, or you are finally getting somewhere? Because I know for a lot of composers, the story is there's hundreds of films or games that they work on, and all those scores, as soon as they get one creditable project, all of those other scores kind of just go away, and then they have this this new sort of resume or portfolio that sort of builds up. So
Okay.
what were the first projects for you? That
I don't think I'm there yet. Seriously, no, I don't think I am. I'm still looking for that thing. I think that you have to pursue. I call it the curse of aspiration. You always aspire to the next thing.
Exactly.
So no matter what you do in the past, it just doesn't matter. Yesterday's music doesn't matter. It's tomorrow's music that matters to me. So no matter what happens to me in the past, it's irrelevant. It can only be what you're doing next. You can't rest on your laurels for a second. And I think the minute you believe in your own Kool-Aid, you should give up. So
Completely agree.
you should just give up. It's just not worth it, right? You never get to that place until they hand you the Oscar, right? At that point, maybe. But for me, I think it's irrelevant, the past. It doesn't matter. I don't consider myself to be a success until, I guess, I die, probably. So I think that for me, it's like that. I think you always aspire to be the next thing, the next, whatever that is.
Yeah, honestly, that's... Yeah.
What he said.
That's probably why no one's ever answered that, because that seems to be like, that's the best answer.
I will add that
It's depressing.
there are metrics that feel like you can track some sort of career progress, like more than my friends played this game. That may not be like, this is the hit, but it's like, that means something, right? Like, hey, people that I've never met actually played this. Even if it's 10 of them, that's still awesome, you know? So there are ways to like track career progress, even though, yeah, tomorrow's music is always what matters more. I couldn't put it better.
I'm going to say something really quick. That is just anecdotal. When I was at Midway as an audio director in San Diego, we went from this big set of 3 buildings to a much smaller building, and so like everybody had their own office, and the producers all of a sudden were in cubicles. So one of them, Nico Bahari, who actually ended up working at 2K, and he worked on like the BioShock series, so really awesome. But at Midway, when he saw his cubicle, he goes, "We finally made it. We've finally done it."
That's a great answer. Wow. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's a good question.
All right. So I saw Journey live, and I was among the many apparently who had never played it.
Oh,
and one of the things I really appreciated about the arrangement is that it noted the fact that there are parts when you're playing that it's silent.
Yeah.
And so now that silence is more acceptable in scoring, do you find yourself having to make a conscious effort to say maybe this section doesn't need a track? And when you do decide that can be silent, do you often get calls from the developer saying, there's this part where's the track? It's supposed to have track, right? Do you still get that? And how do you explain to them that it doesn't have to have a track all the time?
Well, if they have to explain it, then ideally they should just immediately react and say, "Oh wow, you just discovered kind of the magic of the game by the silence actually teases out some new thing, right?" So yeah, I'm very conscious. Like I did a game called The Banner Saga, which is like more silent than not. There's huge swaths without music because I just said, I'd love to hear all the like footsteps and wagon wheels for long stretches, because then when the music comes in, actually it means something. And they're usually on board with that.
How's it going? I had a quick question for Grant. Basically, with the soundtrack for Banjo Nuts and Bolts, I mean, I love the soundtrack. It seems like a lot of people don't like the game strictly because it's a banjo game, but you make it everything for me. My question is that for situations like with Banjo Land, where it seems like it's more an homage to the series as a whole, where it's just like, okay, there's this track, this track, this track for the entire area. There were situations like with Out Around Nutty Acres where Treasure Trove Cove pops up, and it seems a bit more forced. Was that like you putting that in, or was it like Microsoft being like, it's a banjo game, you have to make it sound like one of the old
that was
ones?
on me. I never once got an advisory from Nintendo or Microsoft ever about music I've ever written. So I've always just been my own boss as that goes. But like what I was trying to do in Nuts and Bolts was to include bits of the old stuff. So I often put in bits of old melody in the new stuff. So like in that Nutty Acres thing, it's got Treasure Trove Cove at the end, just because I thought it'd be a laugh. And people might get a bit of kind of, nostalgia about it. But Banjoland was strictly about sticking together as many banjo tunes as I could. So,
which is a phenomenal.
Yeah, so that's it was originally we were going to use the channel fade thing, so it would fade, because in that area there's different levels of all the worlds, wasn't it, all stuck together, but you could get around it so quick that the fade would just go. You never hear a tune, right? It'd be fading constantly. So I just thought I'd just stick it all together and just do it like that. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, I have a quick question for Austin.
I didn't work on Banjo-Kazooie, sorry.
Well, good, it's not about Banjo-Kazooie. So in Banjo-Kazooie, so a lot of my friends who majored in composition, they had a deep frustration with their programs where it was like, you have to write post-tone music. And they felt like they were never allowed to write what they actually wanted to do. Did you have a conflict like that? And if so, how did you reconcile it with what you do professionally now?
Well, obviously I'm a fraud. I did get a little bit of that, much more at NYU than at USC, but it's not like they can stop me from writing. You end up having a brief double life. Well, the truth is I also found things I loved about the sort of mid to late, or sort of, 30s through 70s, 20th century music. There's a lot of amazing things to be learned there. But then, when I went to USC, my teacher was the choral composer Morton Lauritsen, who had just finished teaching Bear McCreary. So he was like, yeah, melody, awesome. He was absolutely on board with all of that. So, academia has gotten a lot better, in other words. Our grand finale.
How do you guys deal with your personal music listening seeping into your composing or your job? Do you try to fight it? Do you embrace it and accept that or do you not have the problem?
I think that every composer is a product of all the other composers that's gone before them. I think you can't help but hear things that you like in other music. It just gets into your music. Like I've talked about Harry Potter, of course, the Harry Potter scores that John Williams wrote. I listen to those constantly. I'm really bad at listening to new music. So I just listen to that and it turns up in everything that I write. I'll probably get sued at some point.
You mentioned you love Judas Priest.
A lot of Judas Priest, yeah, Queensryche, a bit of Pantera. So I guess I think you can't help but be influenced by stuff around you. You hear it all the time, everywhere you listen to. And there's composers that are your favorites that are always going to, you're always going to go, I like how he did that. Can we mimic a bit of that? I think that, I think everybody steals bits and pieces all of it. I know I certainly do. And you learn from it as well. So I think it's inevitable. I think you can't escape that. I think you have to lock you in a cave for 10 years to completely miss out. And even then, you can't escape it. I think it's hard.
I'd agree with that. I mean, like when I recently was introduced to Frost, the band by Chris Ryberg and Jameson Sutton, it wormed its way into my head, and so it influenced a lot of the personal releases that came out.
Yeah, same thing basically.
Thanks everybody for coming. I have one last thing I want to do. Austin, are you familiar with the Colossal Roar of MAGFest?
Yes.
Could you please conduct the audience through a rising crescendo of the Colossal Roar?
All right.
So we can have MAGFest live.
Very short though, so.
This is all you. You do what you want.
All right, you guys ready? I don't know it. Okay. On one, which is down. Okay, ready? And.
Awesome. Thank you.